I want to talk to you about imagination and one of the most amazing books I'm reading because of one of my trainings I have coming up, Emergent Strategy, Shaping Change, Changing Worlds by Adrienne Maree Brown. And this book is all about how do we cultivate change? How do we create change in the world? Adrienne Maree Brown is a Black multiracial artist, writer, activist, change maker, shaper of the world, as well as a science fiction guru or buff, I would say. And that's relevant because in this book, she references Octavia Butler, who was a Black female science fiction author who used her science fiction, she calls it visionary fiction, to imagine new worlds, new ways of being. So inside Temple of the Wild Wanderer, my online membership and circle, we've been discussing the theme of imagination, expand through imagination, for the month of June. And we had a full moon circle where we did a deep pathworking guided visualization where we went into our mind using our imagination, kind of went down into the layers of what do we think we desire for ourselves and the world at large, and then took it even a step further and tried to get down into that soul level of when we are truly living our purpose. What does that look like for us, and what does that look like for the world at large? And this idea of expanding through imagination is that we can't create change without imagination. We need the ability to imagine a new way of being in order to move toward a new way of being. Because if you can't imagine it, you can't create it. You're just stuck in the same patterns. And I was reading this book today and so excited to read that she talks a lot about imagination and this exact topic that we've been exploring inside the Temple of the Wild Wanderer. So we're going to expand on this and have a sharing circle on Monday, June 22nd about this. But even if you can't make the circle, I wanted to read a couple things from the book and talk about this idea of imagination. And keeping in mind that imagination, as she talks about, is shaped by our own concepts. So imagination is not fixed. It might be fixed where you are now, but as you expand your mind, your imagination can grow and expand to include new ideas. So she's talking about her life growing up with a Black father in the military and a white mother in racist Georgia. I thought then, and I think now, this can't be all. No one survives this way, not long term. This can't be the purpose of our species, to constantly identify each other as other, build walls between us, and engage in both formal and informal wars against each other's bodies. I felt and I feel miraculous. It's confusing to feel so miraculous when so many people hate my skin and my history. I see the miraculous in others, even those who hate me have heartbeats, and I generally assume have people they love. Why can't they love me? Should I love them anyway? How can I hold these massive contradictions? I started reading sci-fi obsessively, looking for options, for other worlds where I wasn't dismissed as an idealist or an inferior. On that path, I discovered Octavia Butler. Decades before my birth, she was working these same edges in her heart, pendulum swinging between curiosity, possibility, and hopelessness. Because if we can't articulate more viable futures and adapt, our human future is pretty hopeless. Octavia wrote novels with young Black women protagonists meeting aliens, surviving apocalypse, evolving into vampires, becoming telepathic networks, time traveling to reckon with slave-owning ancestors. Woven throughout her work are two things. One, a coherent visionary exploration of humanity, and two, emergent strategies for being better humans. A visionary exploration of humanity includes imagination. Octavia spent her life working through complex ideas of the future on behalf of humans. As long as we operate in time the way we currently do, remembering the past, observing and acting in the present, imagining the future, there will be divergent paths that are moving in and out of alignment, in and out of conflict. Imagination is shaped by our entire life experience, our socialization, the concepts we are exposed to, where we fall in the global hierarchies of society. Our ideas of right and wrong shift with time. Right now, it's clear to me that something is wrong if it hurts this planet. But if we don't claim the future, that sense of loyalty to Earth, of environmentalism, could become outdated. Kenny Bailey helped me understand this, that justice, rights, things we take for granted are not permanent. Once there were kings and queens all over the earth. Someday we might speak of presidents and CEOs in past tense only. It is so important that we fight for the future, get into the game, get dirty, get experimental. How do we create and proliferate a compelling vision of economies and ecologies that center humans and the natural world over the accumulation of material? We embody, we learn, we release the idea of failure because it's all data. But first, we imagine. And now she talks about imagination and how it has limited us. And we need to be able to expand our imagination. She says, but first we imagine. We are in an imagination battle. Trayvon Martin and Mike Brown and Renisha McBride and so many others are dead because in some white imagination they were dangerous. And that imagination is so respected that those who kill based on an imagined racialized fear of Black people are rarely held accountable. Imagination has people thinking they can go from being poor to a millionaire as part of a shared American dream. Imagination turns brown bombers into terrorists and white bombers into mentally ill victims. Imagination gives us borders, gives us superiority, gives us race as an indicator of capability. I often feel I am trapped inside someone else's imagination, and I must engage my own imagination in order to break free. All of this imagining in the poverty of our current system is heightened because of scarcity economics. There isn't enough, so we need to hoard, enclose, divide, fence up, and prioritize resources and people. We have to imagine beyond those fears. We have to ideate, imagine, and conceive together. We must imagine new worlds that transition ideologies and norms so that no one sees Black people as murderers or brown people as terrorists and aliens, but all of us as potential cultural and economic innovators. This is a time travel exercise for the heart. This is collective ideation. This is collaborative ideation. What are the ideas that will liberate all of us? The more people that collaborate on that ideation, the more that people will be served by the resulting world or worlds. Science fiction is simply a way to practice the future together. I suspect that is what many of you are up to, practicing futures together, practicing justice together, living into new stories. It is our right and responsibility to create a new world. What we pay attention to grows. So I'm thinking about how we grow what we are all imagining and creating into something large enough and solid enough that it becomes a tipping point. Yes, what we pay attention to grows. So I'm thinking about how we grow what we are all imagining and creating into something large enough and solid enough that it becomes a tipping point. Ursula Le Guin recently said it's up to authors to spark the imagination of their readers and to help them envision alternatives to how we live. I agree with her. As Toni Cade Bambara has taught us, we must make just and liberated futures irresistible. We are all the protagonists of what might be called the great turning, the change, the new economy, the new world. And I think it is healing behavior to look at something so broken and see the possibility and wholeness in it. That's how I work as a healer. When a body is between my hands, I let wholeness pour through. We are all healers too. We are creating possibilities because we are seeing a future full of wholeness. I keep thinking about this throughout this whole month and longer about imagination. This all goes back to imagination. In order for us to take action, the imagination needs to come first, because otherwise we have no idea what we're taking action toward. We need to be able to imagine, and imagine collectively, these new ways of being, ones that may not have even crossed our realm of possibility yet because we haven't been living in them. So true imagination, can you imagine something that does not yet exist? She goes on to say, humans, some of us are surviving, following, flocking, but some of us are trying to imagine where we are going as we fly. That is radical imagination. Octavia's protagonists were also interdependent, often polyamorous. I suspect that Octavia understood from her own feelings of loneliness, desire, and pleasure that the personal is political, and that pleasure evokes change, perhaps more than shame. More precisely, where shame makes us freeze and try to get really small and invisible, pleasure invites us to move, to open, to grow. How do we bring more pleasure? She talks about this in the book. How do we bring more pleasure into activism and working toward change? Because for most of us, we are motivated by pleasure a little bit more than shame. And like she says, shame will make us freeze or get small, but pleasure allows us to open and move and grow. How do we make this imagining change so pleasurable that we all want to do it and take part in it? At this point, we have all of the information we need to create a change. It isn't a matter of facts. It's a matter of longing, having the will to imagine and implement something else. We are living in the ancestral imagination of others, with their longing for safety and abundance, a longing that didn't include us or included us as enemy, fright, or other. So we are living in the ancestral imagination of others. We have what we need. It's a matter of longing, having the will to imagine and implement something else. Please read this book. I want to give her credit for all of those ideas that I was just discussing, and obviously was reading directly from her book, Adrienne Maree Brown. You can also find her on Instagram. And another book that she wrote that's amazing is Pleasure Activism, where she goes on to expand upon the pleasure, the idea of pleasure as a change agent. So check that out. And if you're interested in talking more about these themes, imagination, along with a circle of women and those identifying with the feminine, then please feel free to get in touch with me, or I will link to Temple of the Wild Wanderer. You don't have to become a monthly member. You can just drop into a circle. So if you'd like to join us for the sharing circle, then please do. And until then, wander free.